Hello everybody, this is a little different angle than you've seen us before, but I'll explain why in a minute. Yeah, Walter on his angle. So welcome to this episode of So Chatty for September the 9th, 2022. It's episode 74. And what we're going to do today and why we're standing in the Lucy room, because this is Lucy over here, is I've had a few people ask more questions about the computerized system and how that works. Well, that would take me probably a year to explain how it works because I'm still learning it. But I have a couple of things I'm going to show you that are very basic. I've set up a practice quilt, so to speak. You'll understand what I mean by that in a moment. And I'm just going to show you some very basic things about this so you get sort of a sense of how this works. And if you've been following the Idiot Quilter this past week or two, I've been talking about my scrappy Christmas tree quilt, the one that has the appliques on it. Well, they're actually in the hoop appliques and some freestanding lace embroidery, and how I'm going to quilt those, because you can't quilt over top of them because it just wouldn't work. It would be a mess. So I'm going to show you how I intend to do that, but I'm going to show you on the practice one. And I'm hoping that whatever happens here, if that works well, is going to work okay when I do the actual quilt. Time will tell. Now, we don't have anything, usually we talk about our works in progress and what we're working on, but we're not going to do that today because as it is, this video might take a little bit of time with it. We're going to try to keep it as short as possible. So we will talk about our projects probably on Sunday on Stephen and Walter Live, because Walter has an in-person sew day tomorrow, Saturday, and I'm having a pop-up sew craft day here as well. So he'll be at his location, I'll be here at my place, and you probably already know about the pop-up sew day because I've announced it all week in the show notes, and I made a special video, and I've sent out announcements to those of you that are on my mailing list for the pop-up sew day. You do not need to be on the sewing list or the mailing list to come. You just need the Zoom link, and the Zoom link is in several of my videos from this past week, and it will be in this video as well in the show notes. So come whenever you want to. It starts at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but you don't have to be there at the beginning. It's sort of a come and go as you please. It'll probably run approximately until about 5 o'clock. I think Walter's sewing day is over, what, at 4?
4, yeah.
So, you know, he has to get home, get my dinner, you know, things like that. Whatever. I don't know about that so much, but we'll see. So that's approximately how long it's going to go for. Bring whatever you want to work on, and you can work on it. No problem. And we'll talk more after the fact, after the pop-up sew day on the live this week, as well as Craft and Chat, which happened this week too. So there's been a lot of things going on. And we'll talk about what Walter managed to accomplish and how his sew day, in-person sew day, went as well. Because actually that's the first one you've been able to attend. It's the second one they've had, right?
Yeah.
But this is the first one you'll be able to attend. So okay, so that takes us to the quilt path. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what we're going to look at, and then we have to switch cameras. And you'll notice we are donning the new microphones, and hopefully these work. Okay, right now, these microphones don't work with the iPad that's filming this part right now, but hopefully the sound on that will be okay. So what are we going to do? First of all, I'm going to show you what the mechanism looks like that made Lucy into a computerized system, because as you probably do know, because I've mentioned it before, the computerized system is a separate system that you purchase that costs about, well, literally half the price almost.
I think it's $10,900 US right now.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Well, it cost me 13,500 Canadian dollars when I bought it back in May with it.
And then that you had to pay tax on top of
Yeah,
that, plus you had to pay shipping.
Yeah, pay shipping, yeah. So it's just about, you know, just doubles the price of your long arm, okay? Is it worth it? Well, you be the judge. I like it. I think it's worth it. For me, it's worth it. So we're going to show you what the mechanism looks like, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the course that I took We have already spoken about that, but I'm just going to show you the manual, and I have a few updates on what I thought about that course as well from my experiences now that I'm not taking the course and I'm trying to apply what the course taught me or what I remember from the course. And then I'm going to show you a simple setup. I'm going to show you how you do a customized part on your quilt, how you would set that up on the long arm. And then I'm going to show you how you do an edge-to-edge design, but tell the system what to skip over so it doesn't go over top of something that's already been customized, or in the case that I'm going to be using it for in a little bit of time, appliques. And okay, the initial setup as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about problems one may encounter with the computerized system. And yeah, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to switch cameras here right now. So we'll be right back in the blink of an eye. All right, so here is the system. I'm going to switch the camera over to my other cameraman, to Walter, and he's going to come along with me to show you the mechanism. So we need to come over to this side of the room. And so this is all Lucy here. And this is the main part of Lucy, of course, the arm with the needle and everything. But this is the extra part that we had to attach to it. And if Walter can get down here, we can show you how this really hooks together. This bar system runs on the carriage for this, but there are clamps. So I can unclamp these two clamps, and this part separates from this. And you might think, well, why would you want to do that? Well, if you decide to do some free motion quilting not using the computer, if you have this attached to this, it makes this very heavy. But if you disengage it, and I'm not going to disengage it right now, but if you disengage this, this can slide off to the far side of your system, and you're just using this, which makes things a little bit easier. This is a new system for APQS. Their old system, this did not detach. It hooked up in a different way. What's that?
You notice that the bar is holding the pad, was it
Surface, Microsoft
Surface for that you can see the patterns on. So the bar attaches to the carriage here with these clamps, and then the electronics and the motor are inside this box here.
And this is what runs all of this. And there's a belt along the bottom here. Do you show the belt?
Mm-hmm.
This belt, this is what guides it. It doesn't actually pull it. The mechanism, how does it pull it? This is really a guidance, but I guess there's pulleys inside this box. It's a little different system than what, if you have an older APQS with a computerized system, it doesn't work this way anymore.
I believe it used to have a different carriage that the machine sat on. So in the old system, it was harder to disengage the quilt path from it.
Well, I don't think you could.
Yeah.
I don't think you could.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made this whole unit very heavy. So like this thing is very carefully balanced. So when this isn't attached to it, you can take one finger and it'll glide. Even now, actually, it glides very well. But you could feel a little bit of a drag because there's weight. With this off, there isn't that extra weight, and it glides much more evenly. So I would say that's an improvement. I have never used the other system. Not sure. I'm going by what Tracy at Whirls and Swirls had told me about this, and she is the expert, so I believe her. So yeah, we had to assemble all of this, and when I say we, Walter, and get it all hooked up. And there were a couple of moments when we weren't sure what was going on, but we managed to figure it out and we got it all attached. And so there it is. So I thought you might be interested in seeing how this system goes together, the physical aspects of it. Okay, let's move to the front of Lucy, where the Microsoft Pro, Microsoft Surface Pro 7 pad is located. And here it is. And it's a tablet. That's basically all it is. It comes with a stylus. That's magnetic. It clicks onto that. And yeah, so it's all here. So it's not on right now. Now there's two switches I have to flip. to turn the system on. One runs the head of the machine, and one runs that box I showed you that runs the quilt path. And this also supplies power to the surface. Now the surface can run without being plugged in. You'd be running off battery. But it's a fully functional tablet, as you'll see. So you could use this tablet for other things as well. I don't. I'm dedicating it strictly to the quilt path system because I don't want anything to go wrong. So you can see it's got a Windows display screen. Do they have this for a Mac? No. Are they ever coming out with one for Mac? No. I asked that question at my course, and they said they're not because the operating systems are so different. And basically, and what I was told was because of the standards of Apple for making software for Apple are so rigid and so particular that basically the company that creates QuiltPath, which is not Microsoft, okay? Microsoft is just the base, the infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, that runs the program. It was recommended to me that we put it in airplane mode. This is Wi-Fi capable, as most tablets are today. But the reason they said keep it on airplane mode is when you're using QuiltPath is if suddenly Windows decides to do an update and you're in the middle of a quilt, well, all hell could break loose. Now,
I mean, that was airplane mode, right?
Airplane mode, yeah. What did I say?
Airplane.
Cool. Airplane, okay, meant airplane. Airplane mode, okay? Which basically means you're not connected to the internet or to Wi-Fi with it. So yeah, it could wreak havoc if you're in the middle of a quilt and suddenly Windows decided, oh, I have an update for you. You know how that works, right? Now, that made me a little fearful because I'm thinking, okay, Windows has updates all the time. Should I be, when I'm not connected to QuiltPath, updating? So I asked at the class and they said, oh yes, by all means, not a problem. Make sure that your pad is always up to date. So I do. On occasion, I go in and see what the new updates are and install them for that. Because APQS with QuiltPath, you have free upgrades for life. Now, you don't get that on some of the other systems. You have to pay for those upgrades. And this is an expensive program, as I told you on here. So that's a good thing with the upgrades. Okay, so what do we do at this point? Well, if you look here at my setup, well, first of all, before I talk about setup, let me talk about this. This is my $600 book, okay? It's a draft version. QuiltPath, the computerized system, did not come with a manual, no instructions. The only instructions we had was how to hook up the physical components. That was it. They do have some YouTube videos, but a lot of them don't deal with version 5. So you're kind of having to piece together information. Now there's a Facebook user group, which is very, very helpful. I have found that I belong to. But essentially, that's why I had to take the course.
Yeah, so your $600 book, it was included in the course.
It was included in the course. In fact, we all went, oh my God, like that seemed like worth the price of admission. Now, let me tell you about this book. It is a draft copy. It does have a table of contents. Yay. It does have an index. Yay. Why is that important? Because you want to look up things. You don't want to have to read through 1,000 pages. You know, you want to find out how something works. You want to go to that page. That's my theory. That's how I use most manuals. Not this one. It's all there. Table of contents and an index. They tell you nothing. You go to the page and it gives you an overview. You have to piece together how to do certain things. You notice I have sticky notes up here? Those are for things I've been referencing.
So the manual is lacking.
Manual is lacking. Now it is a draft version, and I'm sure they're working on a newer version of it. So this is better than nothing. This is definitely better than nothing. But I find it was a little bit of a disappointment with it. So between it, what videos I can find on YouTube, and my own playing around with it, I am slowly learning in bits and pieces how to use this program. And it's starting to make more sense to me now after a couple of months than it did when we first got it. But you have to, and they talked about this in the course, you have to think like the machine. And the machine does not think like we do. And so once you get into that mindset, certain things do start to make sense. But it is a very, very steep learning curve with it. But I am glad to have this, but it is lacking. I'll be honest about it. And I'm sure when they make more revisions to it, things will be better. Okay, just before I get into showing you what I have here, I want to show you the setup. Okay, what I've done is I've just made a quilt sandwich, a small one, from short pieces of fabric I had laying around and a short piece of batting. And I have shown how to load a quilt on Lucy in previous videos, so I'm not going to get into that today, but this one's all set up. But if you take a look here, if Walter can get a close-up, what I did was I had a grid sewn out on this. Now the computer did this. I didn't even have to design this grid with squares because it was in some of the programs or some of the files that came with QuiltPath, so it was easy enough for me to set up and do this. And the reason I'm doing a grid is so it'll be clearer for you to see what I'm talking about when I come to things like this in here and how the edge-to-edge design works. I did this with plain white fabric on the top, and I'm doing it in black thread because that shows up the best for this demonstration. Okay, let's just come over here. Okay, one other thing. This little device is new. This is a finger mouse. These are made not to be used with a system like this. They're meant to be used on your hand. They call a finger mouse, so you can be typing along, the theory is, and instead of reaching over to hit your mouse, you just hit one of these buttons that's on the side. This is actually on here upside down because this is how it has to fit on here. The reason I got one of these is there are certain things when you're moving around you're going to see when I talk about marking your quilt for where you want things to go. It's easier to have your hand on here rather than holding this down because this moves. And it moves very freely. So when you're hitting something on the screen, your hand might move slightly like I just did, and your mark is off. This makes it a little easier. You just click the button and it will do its thing. Now you're not seeing anything here right now because I'm not hooked in. And I may or may not use that for today's demonstration because I'm still trying to get used to it. Okay, so here's my screen. So let's get into QuiltPath. So I just double click like you do on any Microsoft program. It's coming up with a warning. It's just making sure that my sewing machine needle is up and that I'm somewhere in the center of the quilt. It doesn't matter where exactly. But what's really important is that the needle's up, because if by chance, and this machine is set so that when you're finished the needle does come up in most cases, but just in case, if that was down and then it goes to move over to the center, you're going to break your needle or bend it because it's going to be caught in the quilt. So that's just a little warning. And one thing I do like about this program is there are a lot of warnings that come up to make sure you're doing the right thing. You can turn those off, but I have chosen not to. And I don't know if I ever will turn those off because I think they're a really great reminder because there's so many things to remember when you're doing a quilt. It's easy to miss a step or forget something. So we'll just click OK. And you see, the machine is just moving slightly. Okay, so now here's my main screen and I have three choices. I have select and sew. You go into that. We're going to go into that in a minute to mark for customizing, doing block by block as opposed to edge to edge, or they call it a pantograph, similar to having a paper roll on the back of your long arm and tracing it out. Well, same idea. It goes from edge to edge. And then borders. And borders is if you want to do a fancy design in the border section, there's things in there to allow you to set that up. That one I have not used at all yet. They talked about it in the course, but they haven't used it yet. Now over here you see they have tutorials and user manuals. Those have nothing in them. They're not populated. That's for future expansion. They've never bothered to stick anything in there. So we won't even talk about that. These are other features which are actually very powerful if you want to design your own pantograph or your own special design. They're basically drawing programs, and you can go in. We played with those a little bit. It's kind of neat, but that's something that I cannot see myself using very often. Maybe, I don't know, bit more of a learning curve. And this one, record, does what it says. So let's say I had a design and I was doing some free motion quilting. I can hit the record button and it will record the movement of my arm and everywhere where it goes in the design, and then it'll save it into the system. And if I want to repeat that, I just click on that file and away it'll go. It'll do the same thing, which I think, especially for people who love to do free motion quilting and a lot of customization, I could see that one being, handy. But we're not going to talk about those. We're only going to talk about these two. Select and sew. So when you first go into select and sew, it comes up with this. You have to tell it where the safe areas are. Well, what are safe areas? Well, if you look down here, Walter, you see where these clamps are? These clamps you put on either end just to keep your quilt taut in the horizontal direction. And of course, the quilt is kept taut with the rollers and everything vertically. But you got to tell the system where the safe area is, or when you're getting close to those clamps. Now, I thought, until I took the course, I was having a lot of problems getting my patterns in the safe area. It would come up, it would warn me that when I had designed something, that I wasn't in the safe area. And I thought, oh, why? And I tried to readjust this and that and the other thing. Turns out I could still quilt. It's just a suggestion. It's just saying you're probably getting a little close to your clamps or whatever. You might want to readjust what's going on. It's not the big panic system that I thought it was. So the first thing it wants you to do is mark the top left corner. So you just slide your machine over to wherever that's going to be. And I'm just going to say it's there. I hit that. Now it wants the bottom right. Now what you're doing is you're setting up the outer parameters of your quilt area. And now we've done that. And now, because there is another step, but that's for edge-to-edge design. Right now what we're into is the whole pattern system. And this is for doing something like what I have down here in the center. Let's pretend this is a block in a quilt and you just want this design in this block. So how do you do that? Well, let's select a design. Let's take something that's really simple. It's not going to take long to quilt out. Let's take that one. Now there are over 500 designs of various types in this program. I'm just showing you a few. So I open it, and now what we have is a picture of the quilt, basically, or the quilting area. This is all the quilting area, and this is my design. But right now it's just floating in space. There are different ways I can mark this, but I'm going to use the most basic, which is 4 points, and that's what it defaults to. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to move my machine over and I'm going to find a block. And let's say I want this area here, these 4 blocks. I could make it bigger, I could make it smaller, but I'm just going to, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to use these 4 blocks and pretend this is a block on a quilt. So I have 4 dots. All I need to do is move my needle into a position where I want it to start. Well, it's not actually where it's going to start. It's just marking the parameter of the design. So I've moved my needle here, and I'm going to hit that top one. Now you notice it moved because that is, it knows the area of the quilt. So yeah, that's where it should be. Now I want the second mark. And I want it there. Hit screen. I could be using the stylus as well. I'm going to go down to the bottom right corner, hit that one, and now I'm going to go to the bottom left corner. Right there. That's where my design is going to go. Now, as long as I don't hit any of those buttons on the side, I can move this wherever on here. It'll go to where it's going to start. But if I want to make sure that this is going to go in the area I want to go into. And Walter, I don't know if you have that in the shot. This down in here. I'll put the needle in the center of this. This is where that design I've picked that's on screen is going to go. But just to make double sure, I can do something called trace. So I hit that button, and instead of hitting sew, I hit trace. And what that does is it keeps the needle up. It doesn't do any sewing, but it will go around and follow the path of that design. This way I can see, are these going to be approximately in the area where I want them? So I hit trace. Here we go. It moves to the starting point, and now see it's already started doing the design. Now, of course, it's not sewing, but I can watch this and see, okay, the needle's going to go up here. So like I don't want it to go over into this area. So I'm just checking to make sure that my marks are spaced.
Plus it's showing you on the screen where it would be sewing, right?
Yes. So that darker blue lines is showing where it is sewing. Now, I'm not going to let this play out the whole thing through because I think you get the idea. But you see, I can, as I watch this, I can tell. And if it's not in the right spot, I can go in and adjust it. So that is, I just do a reset on those 4 corners and I just start again until I get it to where I want it to be. So it allows you to be very precise in the placement of something like this. So if I had a quilt that I wanted a different quilt design in each block, I can do this without a problem at all. Now, yeah, if you're a free motion quilter, you just do it on your own, but I'm not. This is for me, it's free motion. Okay, it has stopped. I like where it is. Everything's ready to go. So I'm actually going to sew it. So the first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. Now, this does have a control for this. Pull up bobbin. Basically, it goes over to a spot, it drops the needle down, it brings the needle up, you grab the thread, it moves it over, you pull up the bobbin thread, and then it puts it back, and then it starts to sew. It is slow when it does that. Tracy recommended, and I agree, this is how I do it. You just do it manually. It saves you the time. So I'm just going to drop my needle, bring it up, pull up my bobbin thread, it's right there, hang on to it, and I'm going to hit sew. So you see, it's putting in my design just in that block. Now, of course, as I'm sure you realize, I would not have all these grid marks on my quilt. I'm just using those to designate sections of my fake quilt here for the purpose of this demonstration. Up here, it shows you the length of the stitches, meaning how much thread you're going to use. And so that's 82 inches of thread it's going to take. The number of stitches total, how much has been sewn so far. You see it's almost to the end. And what's remaining, counting down, and the percentage. Now, I wish it had a timer on it. I wish it would tell me how long a certain pattern would take. And now it's done, and it's...
Yeah. Well, wouldn't that depend on what speed you have the machine set at?
Yeah, it would, but they could do that. They could do a calculation. I asked about that feature, if on the next version of this, if they would come out with that. And she basically said no, because there's various factors that would have to work in. I didn't like her answer because it was very vague. I think it's probably a lot of work to put in the algorithms for that, but there are many. My embroidery machine tells me how much time it's going to. It's an approximation, but it's better than nothing. It works, so why they couldn't design that in here, I don't know. But one thing I did learn the other day is here, trying to figure out how much bobbin you're going to need is tricky. On something this small, I don't have to worry. My bobbin's going to do whatever I do today. It's a new bobbin. But if you're doing an edge-to-edge design on a full-size quilt, what happens is you do things in rows. And you'll see in a minute what I mean by that.
Well, that's also because you don't have something that indicates that your bobbin's run out.
No. Well, yes, you do. But it's kind of runabout. If you show up here, this is my thread out sensor. If the thread breaks or if the bobbin runs out, so that then the tension on this goes off because there's nothing to hold it up, there's a little signal. It goes beep, 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 beep. Now, if you may have noticed, for those of you that were paying attention, right when I first started sewing this, it went beep, 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 beep. I'm not sure why, because it hadn't done anything. It hadn't run out of thread. I noticed that when I'm doing these custom kind of designs.
Because your thread isn't threaded properly?
Well, that could be. It is now. But anyways, it would come up and beep, 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 and you'd stop the machine. And in fact, it stops the machine itself when that happens. So you can rethread it and everything like that. And you can figure out where you left off. And there's some things in here that help you with all of that, something called repair pattern. But I'm not going to get into that today because that's beyond the scope of what today's video is about. So yeah, or if you had a power failure and everything went down, you can get back to where you left off with this. Or let's say you've got a huge quilt and you've been working on it for, several hours, you're tired, you want to go to bed or something, you can finish up and pick up where you left off the next day. Not as easy as that sounds. There is a trick to that. But like I said, that's beyond the scope of today's video. Maybe down the road I will show that. I'm still trying to get used to that one too, because it's tricky. But anyway, so what was I talking about before I went off on a tangent on all of this? Yeah. Do you remember?
No.
No, you didn't pay attention to it. It was something.
You were talking about
the grid, the threading of it. Oh, well, it'll come back. It couldn't have been that important. Okay, so I have finished this. Now, you'll notice on here it says finish, back to pattern placement. Okay, so let's say I want to put it in another spot. I would do the same thing. I would move this over to the next area, make sure I cut my thread. And I would do the same thing again, but I'm not going to do that now. But that would be basically how you would do custom quilting, in the sense that if I wanted to make a different pattern in every block, I can do that. And also, this is pretty straight, this one that's here, but let's face it, quilts aren't, okay? You could have wonky blocks. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, you're gonna have wonky blocks. So that's why you have 4 points, because this could look a little skewed. Like for example, if I want to go over here, but my block was just slightly skewed down this way where the edge of it is. And let's say this one's not too bad. And this one, we'll move up here a little bit. And well, that doesn't really help. I should have reset it, sorry. Okay, reset. Okay, so this one is okay there. This one was down, just maybe down 1/4 of an inch on this corner. This one was pretty much bang on, and this one was maybe off by 1/4 of an inch over here. So you see it's a little bit skewy on that, but it would look fine on your quilt, okay, because it's relative to your quilt size. So that allows you that opportunity to do that. There are 2 buttons down here too, and I have stretch clicked right now. That's so it'll fill that whole space, but if I hit fit, well, on that design there isn't going to be any difference, but you can play with those 2 buttons to get it exactly, where you want it inside the marked square. This one's not a good example for showing that. And you can do other things to it. You can fine tune. That's what all these buttons are for, but we're not going to get into that right now. Okay, so that's basically how you do custom, doing it block by block. Or let's say you wanted a whole row of, say, this design right here, or you want to alternate it. See what I've got here. Walter, do you have that on here? This block and this block, but let's say this is my whole quilt and I want to alternate these. So, in here I'm going to put this one, and beside it I'll put this one, and then I'll put, flip-flop. I could do that. I could build those all across there. I can save the design and away I go with it. So it's fairly versatile. All right, let's get out of this completely. Okay, I'm out now, and I'm going to show you an edge-to-edge design. Okay, pantograph. Now it says, would you like to reset the safe area? In this case, no, because I'm using the same safe area, so I'm just going to say no. And there's my whole grid, what you see here. So this is marking if, Walter, you follow my hand or follow my needle. So basically from here down to about here, to over here, to up here. This is the area that I'm sewing in. And you're going to say, yeah, but you have much more quilt. Well, yes, but we'll come to that. All right, some information though down here that we need. Our safe area has been set, but we need to set these two parameters, total width and total height. Total width means from one side of the quilt to the other side of the quilt, the area you actually are going to quilt in. Total height means the total height of the entire quilt. This threw me off. I only have 26 inches of space to quilt in on the Lucy. That's what I thought it meant. It doesn't. It means the total of your quilt. So if this quilt was 72 inches long, I would change this up here and I would put 72 inches up in here. But I'm not going to, I am going to do that right now because I'm just going to pretend that that's what I've got. Okay? Now, how do I adjust this, the total width? Well, you could measure it with a tape measure, but that's not accurate. Quilt path does not measure exactly the same as a tape measure. And in fact, what the instructor of the course, Angela Clark, said, you give her 5 tape measures and she'll find each one will be slightly different in the way that they measure things out, which is kind of scary when you think about it, because I don't know about you, but I use tape measures quite a bit for quilting. You expect them to be standard, but they're not. So I guess what she was saying there too is don't buy your tape measure at the dollar store. Buy Clover or a name one. Yes, you're going to pay more for it, but maybe you can expect that they will be more accurate. But we don't need a tape measure. It has one built into it. Up here on the screen, there's a little yellow ruler. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it how wide our quilt is, this pink area. So down here I have a couple, there's a lot of buttons here, but we're only going to deal with these two. This is the beginning of one edge of the quilt. It doesn't matter where you're at the top or in, I usually do it from the middle of the area, and I go to my edge of my quilt, and in this case it would be in approximately right there. It doesn't have to be bang on accurate because you are going to probably stitch outside of your quilt and into your batting a little bit, because we usually do. So I hit that button, I move the carriage all the way over to the other spot, and I hit that one. So I've got this line, that's the width of my quilt. It tells me up here quilt width is 32.965 inches, and then I hit apply. And that's what comes up in that screen right there, 32.965 inches. So it now knows that's my total quilt, total height, 72 inches, even though I don't have 72 inches to quilt in, but it knows now, that's for calculation purposes. When it places the pantograph, it wants to know that, and it knows the total width. Okay, so now we need to select a pattern. So we go here. Now I've got something set up here called Power Panto. This is the one that most people use all the time, but there's other modes, easy, basic, and advanced. I'm not even going to talk about those today. We're just going to go with the Power Panto. Let the machine, let the computer do the work for you. I mean, after all, you spent all this money, make the bugger work. Select pattern. Okay, now you see up here, it defaults to block. That's what I used just a moment ago. But we don't want that. We want this to be an edge-to-edge design, or as the machine calls it, continuous line. So we go into that category and we have all of these. And let's pick something really basic. Let's go for let's go for a crow wave instead. So we open that and it's showing you this is the whole quilt. Well, that design's pretty large, okay? So we're going to shrink it down. Now it tells you the pattern height. Everything in here is in inches, okay? And I don't know if you can switch it over to metric or not. I'm comfortable in inches, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to hit the minus sign and reduce it. And you see, as I reduce it, and I would think for this one, because these squares are, what, about 2.5 inches each or so, they don't have to fit. I'm not going to try to fit them in these squares because this is not the way a quilt would look. So I'm just going to reduce it to maybe 5.5 inches. Looks good. But you notice they look like they might be touching, and you don't necessarily want that in a pattern. So we can adjust that. But it's hard to adjust it by looking at it from here. So we can blow it up. We go to the magnifying glass, and we can go from where it fits the window right up to 100%. Well, I'm just going to go 3/4 of it. Now we can see the pattern a little bit more closely. You notice right here it's touching. That's the vertical. So I'm going to hit the vertical, and it's going to pull that apart a little bit. Now, if you want, I can go up a little more. So see, now I can see how much space is between it. Let's make it really obvious. So that's 1/2 inch between each other. That's too much. I usually like to go at about 1/4 inch. In fact, slightly less, maybe even a little bit more. So I'm going 0.15 inch. So they just don't touch. Now I can adjust the horizontal as well, but I don't need to because I have these buttons, pattern fitting. So this one will fit it for the total width. This one fits it for the total height. So if I hit this one, there. So I've got a row going off, a ghost row here, and that is fine. Now you can play with those and do whatever way you prefer. I'm just going to leave it at that. Over here you have the ability to stagger the design. Stagger is off right now, but you notice everything is going the same way. If I want to get fancy, oh, I guess not on this design. Or does it? No, I did slightly changed it. It's not very obvious in this particular design, but other designs, you might want it to go the opposite way. You know, one row goes this way, one row goes that way. Well, actually, I can do that. If I go here, and let's see. I flipped it that way. No, flipped that way. Let's try. Oops, don't like that. You can create, though, interesting designs doing this. Another thing, you can go down the rabbit's path and fool around with it. Now there, that's alternating, so you can see it gives like that. I'm not going to bother. I'm going to turn it off. Oops.
I think you had to go back to that one.
Yeah, there we go. We're back to that. But you see, you can play around with any of these designs. So even though this is a fairly basic design, you can get very elaborate with it just by playing in those. You can spend hours playing with it. I'm not going to do that today. Okay, these two buttons are important. One says place as a single pattern. Well, if I wanted to do only one large row of this, and maybe I'm going to do different rows of different patterns or something like that, I might use that. But generally speaking, for an edge-to-edge design, most people are using this. Sew in zones. Now it says, would you like to save the zone sewing session? This is something you should get into the habit, we were told in the course, of doing, because if like the power goes off or something like that, this is part of the process of resuming a pattern where you've left off. So I'm going to say yes, and then I just give it a name. So I'm going to call it Test Zone 1. Now you can call it anything you want. And there's there, and it's saved. Now, if I want to come back to it, then I can go in where it says Load Pentagraph, and I can pull it back up, okay? And you will have several zones. Notice this is Zone 1. In a full-size quilt, you might have 5, 6, 7, 8 zones. And a zone is the area that it will quilt in before you have to roll the quilt ahead. And I may be able to show you that in a moment. But right now, the machine doesn't know where to start. The red line means the safe area. If my green box means that's the area I'm going to quilt in. If that area is hanging over or above those, it's going to come up and say I'm out of safe area, and that's a problem. But this green box allows me to set the machine so it knows where to start sewing from. So this is called centering, and that yellow dot means the center at top of the quilt. So this is my center of my quilt right here, and this is the top. And I'm just going to start it there. I'm going to click that, and I'm in the safe area. Now, if I had gone, let's say I'd gone way up here, probably can't. Maybe I can go over here this far over and do that. Out of safe area. And I don't want that.
It turns pink, right?
Yeah. And so that, you know, is going to cause you some grief. So you don't, you could start it, you could quilt that, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's going to hit those clamps in this case. So I'm going to reset this again. And there, we're okay. Now, before I go to the next stage, you'll see there's some dots here. I'm still learning about these. Some patterns have thread jumps for some reason, or pause parts for one reason or another. But I don't want it to do that. I don't want it to stop. I want it just to keep going. So I'm going to go up to optimization. And I'm going to say remove all. And there wasn't anything for it to remove because I didn't have any jumps on this particular pattern. If I did, you'd see blue lines going all over here. What do these mean? Well, this means this is our first design. We only have one design. This means this is where the needle's going to start. Get out of there. Sometimes your pen, if it comes close, can change things without touching it. That's a start line, and that's a stop line. So I know. So what this is going to do, it's going to follow this path in around here. Now this is my row that would be slightly off the edge of my quilt or at the very edge, the part where you would probably trim it off. I usually, that's, you know, it's part like up here. If you see this black line, this is where I basted the quilt down on the sides of that. So that's going to get cut off. And also there's going to be binding on this eventually. So I don't worry about that. But that lets me know where it's going to do that. So that's why that's sort of the ghost row. And then the rest of the pattern. So I like where it is. Now I have it set at the speed of 3. But it could be a 4. It could be a 5. It could be 1, 2, 3. 3 is about medium speed. That's the speed that was recommended to us. Yes, it's going to take you longer to do a quilt. But if you've got a lot of curves, a lot of intricate patterning, the faster the machine is, the more chance you may break a thread. So they recommend it to stay in the middle ground, and I'm going for that. There's some other things you can do here too, but we're not going to worry about all those things. Okay, we're going to say this is all set up the way you want it. Okay. Now, I always like to do a trace, again, like I did before, because I just want to see how close I've got it to the edge if I'm in the right area. So I'm just going to hit trace. Remember, trace will not sew. It will just go through the motions of sewing. So it's going over to that green circle up there to the start. And yes, the start is not right at the very beginning of the design because it backs over on itself in this case. So here we go. And I'm liking where that's positioning. But you can see now it's doing that flat part across. And that would be right along my edge of my quilt. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Once I square up the quilt, once I get it off and I put the binding on, no one's going to ever see that. In fact, it'll probably get cut off. I usually design it so that it will get cut off. But what I want to see here is how far over on this side is it really going to go? It should go to right about here in that area, which is fine. But I just like to double check it. And yes, I will often do a whole zone in trace before I actually start the quilting, just to make sure. Okay, so we're going to watch for this point here and right there, and that's perfect. That's exactly where I want it to be on this one. So that's fine. Stop. I don't need to go through all the motions. Now I can do sew. Now, right now, my carriage is locked. I can't move it, which is fine. However, if I want to pull up my bobbin thread, I don't want to pull it up here. I would like to pull up my bobbin thread usually on an edge-to-edge design out at the outside edges into the batting and the backing off the quilt. So then I don't have to worry. I can just cut it off. It'll be fine. I don't even have to pull up the bobbin thread. But how do I do that from here? Well, I can't really release the, well, I can. If I go into Toolbox, I can release the carriage. So now I can move it on. Now I could use pull bobbin thread, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you what that looks like for the bobbin, pulling up the bobbin thread. So I click on that.
Shouldn't you pull it up over there?
Yes.
Okay.
You're excused. You never use it. So it's going over to this area and it will stop. It drew a line for where it was before, but that's not a stitch line. That's just showing you where it was traveling from. So now it wants me to pull up the bobbin thread here. And you'll notice that's the starting point there. Remember, you might be thrown off because you're thinking, well, shouldn't it start up here? No, because of the way the design is on this particular one. So you follow the instructions. This is what I do like about this program. It says press single stitch, grasp thread, single stitch. It goes down, it comes up, it says press, move away. Then it says pull up bobbin thread. So like you usually do. In fact, my bobbin thread's already there when it moved it away. So my bobbin thread is there. So I just hold, I pull enough of this through, I just hold those and it says press sew. And here we go. Now they'll lock the stitch and it'll start going. Now there's one thing I didn't do. This would probably stitch into this, and I don't want it to do that. But I would have set this up differently if this had been on a quilt. I'm just showing you edge to edge, but I'm going to stop the edge to edge here in a second and show you how I can avoid those areas but keep a continuous design. So you see, that's my waist up there. I'll be cutting that off. Now I want to see how far down here it's going to travel. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it just move over to this end to finish that off, and then I'm going to stop it and I'm going to set it up for an eclipse. Now, normally I would have set the eclipse up at the same time as I was setting up that pantograph, but I didn't want to get you too confused as to what's going on with all of this. And of course on the screen you can see it showing you the progress with the dark blue line. And it's also telling you the total length of thread. That's what I was going to tell you before. Sometimes you don't know how much bobbin thread you have left. So I stop at the end of a zone, and if I don't feel I've got enough for a second zone, I will replace the bobbin. But I just recently figured it out that there's approximately 2,600 inches of thread on a bobbin. So I know that for this zone, I'm only going to use 447 inches. Do the math. I can probably get 6 zones, 5 zones out of one bobbin on this particular design on here. So that helps. Okay, I want to stop this. And I want to go finish. Back to placement. Now, I'm just going to cut thread here, not the way you'd normally would do it. But you got the idea of a pantograph here. But now, let's say I'm setting up my pantograph and I don't want it to stitch over top of these. Say these were appliques, or they could be just what I've got here, a custom design, and I don't want my pantograph going over top of it because it would be a mess. So how do I set that up? Okay, so what we need to do is we got to, first of all, we have to place where this is going to start. Now, I would do the same things. I would set up my safe area. I would load my design. I would do my fiddling around for spacing and everything. Walter ran into the door. And all of that stuff, which I'm not going to do now. Let's say that's done. It actually is done. But I need to place it first of all. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to say this here is the top center of my quilt. In reality, it is not, but that's where I'm going to pretend it is for this demo. So I'm going to hit that. Ooh, I have a problem. It's gone into the not safe area. So I can move this up slightly. Nope. But that's because of where I'm starting in this. I don't need to worry about that for this demo, okay, because that's not going to cause me any grief. But as I said, it's a warning. I can still sew. Don't have to worry about it. So we're going to ignore the fact it says it's out of the safe area. And let's go to plugins. And there's something called pattern eclipse, which basically means telling the machine where not to sew when it's doing this whole design. So I click on that. And now it's showing me the design. And I have several buttons here. This button says keep out, or if I click on it's a toggle, keep in. So it works in two ways. If I don't want it to sew on top of this design, that's keep out. But let's say this was the only area where I wanted it to sew. The reverse. I'd keep it in. So everything on the outside, it wouldn't sew in this area. Probably keep out is the one that's used the most, I would say. So, all right, how do I tell it where not to sew? Well, remember how we marked the custom ones before? It's the same. We have an add button. We're not going to worry about the new region button. We're only going to worry about the add and the remove buttons. So I move my needle to where I want the area that I do not want to have sewn into starts. I click add. Right there, little dot. See the little dot? Okay, now I'm going to go over here to the top part of this. Add another one. Ooh, I have a line. I'm going to go down here to the bottom of that design, add another line. And then I'm going to go over here to this spot and add another. That is an eclipse. Keep out. This will start sewing over here. It'll do this, but then it'll stop sewing. It'll work its way over to the other side and carry on for the stitching. Now I can add more on here if I want to. Or let's say I made a mistake. I can remove. It just works in the reverse. I put it on one of those spots and it removes the line. But why is this also useful? And why did people get so excited about this, which I never knew about until I started doing all of this? When you come to the bottom of a quilt, you may have more design than you have of quilt. Maybe you only have this much fabric left in your backing and your batting, but you've got this much to quilt. Well, that's not going to work, is it? Or you don't want to waste thread or backing fabric, and you only need this much of your row to finish off the quilt when it gets down there. Well, you can eclipse exactly what I've shown you here. You draw the lines dot to dot where you don't want it to stitch, and you don't have that problem anymore. So it gets rid of that. You couldn't do that before on the earlier versions of this program. So this was the feature that made apparently this new version, this version 5 of QuiltPath, so exciting for so many people. I'm thrilled with the fact that I can do this, that I have figured this out, And now I can take that scrappy Christmas tree quilt I'm working on, and I should be able to avoid the appliques. Should. You know, for me, things always go awry. All right, you can preview this. You can see what it looks like. And so here it is. So this is what's going to happen. It's going to sew up there. It's going to come along here. It's going to sew up in here and all of that and carry on down there. And it'll look basically like the quilting's going underneath the applique or underneath the block, the custom block. Get out of that. So I'm not going to put it through trace. I can do that again, but I'm not going to bother. You've seen trace. I'm just going to say that it's right, except that now I've already got the placement. That's already been set up because I did that beforehand. I don't need to do that again. It's out of safe area. Yeah, we're ignoring that. We're just going to go to sew. However, I do want to pull up my bobbin thread. So I'm just going to go off the quilt. It doesn't matter where I go. Okay, it's pulled up, and I'm going to go to sew.
Now aren't you going to get your line? It's sewing your line up top.
Oops. Yeah. Well, that's because I started in the middle of the quilt. So we're just going to ignore that. But yeah, that's only because of where I've started. And I could have gotten rid of that line if I'd used the eclipse higher, but I'm just showing you how. So ignore the line. Ignore the line behind the curtain. Okay, so you see, we don't want it to sew in here, right? Now, I didn't tell it to miss that one, so ignore that. Well, it doesn't matter. This is just a demo piece. I could have told it to ignore that, but I didn't. Now, you can also set it up so it will draw a box around what it's avoiding right here, if you want. I didn't do that. I'm just going to go behind you. Now, I'm not going to have it do the whole thing because you'll get the idea here. I'm just going to let it...
Like your thread ran out.
Oh, and that's what happens when, it says I have a broken thread detected, so I'll go OK and check it here. And it's basically, it's my bobbin that has run out. So I would move it over to the side and release the carriage. I would replace my bobbin. I'd come in. I'd come back to the area that I left off in using the repair. I'm not going to get into that right now because that's a little bit fiddly for now. But there you have it.
You get the idea.
You get the idea. So I'm going to tell it that this is done. and finished. And I'm just going to cut my thread here, and we're going to take a little closer look at this. Okay, so bring your camera over. All right, ignore this at the top. That was showing you the pantograph, okay? These two things I did not want it to stitch into. It did here a little bit. That's because I didn't adjust it properly, and like I said, this is when I would use the trace to make sure that I have everything in the right spot. But what I'm trying to show you is how you can do an edge-to-edge design and avoid obstacles like applique or certain blocks that have been customized. So you see it did all the stitching in around here, but it avoided it. Ignore that one because I didn't set it up for that. And then over here. So that's how it works. And it's really easy to set up with it. So essentially, what I'm showing you on this video, put it on me now. What I'm showing you on this video is the very basics of quilting a quilt. How to set it up. You set up the area that you don't want to have sewn into, the safe zone. You set up the measurements of the quilt. You pick your pattern. You decide on whether you're doing a custom block or if you're going to do a pantograph. If there's an obstacle like an applique, you're setting up an eclipse, and away it goes. The only thing I didn't show you was how do we go to another zone? How do we advance the quilt and know where to start? So let us pretend that we have finished a design and it's time to roll the quilt ahead. So what I want to do is, now I got to think about this for just a second. So it is finished and I had set it up as zones. So let's see.
Maybe you should show this when you're actually doing a quilt.
I think I need to show this when I'm actually doing a quilt, because what happened is I stopped this too soon and it doesn't know that it's time to go to the next zone. I don't want that. Yeah, I think that's what I will save for another time.
Might be information overload.
Oh, here we go. Oh. Next zone. Okay. All right. So if this was the end of the quilt, or the end of that section, when it says it's going to go to the next zone, there would have been a button there, and I have to mark the zone. So you notice this has come down to this area here. That's based in relationship to where I set the first placement. So what you do is, there's several ways to mark this, but I use painter's tape. So I grab a little piece of painter's tape and you place the painter's tape right under your needle. Then it says single stitch. So what it's going to do is just, the needle's going to go down and the needle's going to come up. And there we go. Of course, I didn't check the bobbin. Well, it doesn't matter if I have a thread because I'm not going to do any sewing. Okay, it says done. It says to continue. This is the warning system, which is good. Are you sure all the zone markers have been properly placed? Yes, that's how you do it. So I go, yes. It says the machine will now move to where the fabric marker for the next zone should be positioned. So we let it move. Now it's not rolling the quilt, it's just moving the needle. Now it's going to give you another instruction. It says move the fabric. Move the fabric so that marker 2A, it says this is 2A, the second one in this case, is beneath the sewing machine needle. This does not have to be precise, but try to get it as close as possible. So I need to take my clamps off. And I'm now going to loosen my tension bar, and I'm going to set, my foot pedals are down here because my machine automatically rolls ahead, and I'm going to wind. And what I'm doing is I'm moving that green tape up so that that needle is right over the hole it made a moment ago. As close as I can get it. tighten it up. Now at this point what I would do is I would straighten out the quilt, the batting, the backing, and I would baste. I'd put my clamps back on, and I would, you don't have to put them on right now. I would baste my quilt down on the sides for that area. And once I've done all of that, this is also a good time when I might change my bobbin as well. I would slide it off the side, and then I'd come back into this spot here because it's already marked. I know where it has to be. So it says, move the fabric so the marker is. We've done all of that. I say, okay. And it asks you, have you moved the fabric? Touch OK after the fabric marker 2A has been positioned on the needle. People find this annoying, and you can turn it off. Do not show again. But I choose to leave it on because there are so many things to think about. Unless you were doing this and every day you were quilting on this machine in the whole bit, it's easy to forget one of the steps. So I choose to leave it on, and I think that's a good feature, as I've already said it several times before. Click OK. So I'm ready. It's ready to go. I can do a little trace. System's not connected. Well, it is. Don't know why it's saying USB cannot connect. Well, that's interesting. I don't know what that's all about. But anyways, that's all you do to mark it, and away you go. Now, there are other ways to mark it, but this is the way I do it. There are some other ways.
Yeah, so it's now showing you the next zone.
Yep. Yeah. So we're at zone 2.
Yeah.
Now, I would save that zone. I'd go up here and I'd save that again, which is, and I have a habit of not doing that, and I have to get into that habit more, and away you go. And that's how you advance the quilt every time, so that the spacing is correct between each row of your
So you
panographs.
keep advancing it until your quilt's done, right?
That's right. That's all there is to it. So that's it. That's basically how you quilt a quilt using the computerized system. Yes, there's so much more you can do. And are there problems? Oh, yes. Yes, 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 yes. I don't think I've done a complete quilt yet where I didn't have a little bit of a goof up. Most of the time I can correct the goof up. I'm getting better at that. But yes, this is not plug and play as in, oh yeah, go and say to the computer, okay, computer, quilt, do it, and walk away and come back 3 hours later and your quilt is done. No. And as soon as you turn your back on this machine, like all technology, it goes, I'm feeling lonely. I'm going to screw up. I want you back here. And it does. And Lucy does. And Lucy and I have had words. Oh, we've had a lot of words over time. But overall, I do not regret paying the big bucks for the computerized systems, because for me, that gets my quilts done. If I wanted to do full free motion quilting, I could. I won't do it well, whereas this will do it for me. And if people think this is cheating, so be it. I don't mind cheating. It's the 21st century way to do a quilt, and I see nothing wrong with embracing the technology. Okay, so I hope that's you have any parting words, just in case, so you can see Walter. Here he is. He was cameraman today, wearing one of his lovely creations, his lovely shirts. I am too. And so, do you have any parting thoughts about Quilt Path?
It looks pretty good.
Yeah. He hasn't used it.
I haven't used it, but I've seen it being in action.
He waits until I work out the bugs.
I hear you swear a few times.
I don't swear. Well, I do, but it's in a complete sentence always when I do that. Okay, so that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Long video. But anyways, see you next week. Say goodbye, Walter.
Bye.
Bye, all.